must be Thursday, another edition of the sewing workshop, and today we're going to look at seams. So we're starting here at the very beginning, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can get things right. Before I start my little lesson with you, I would like to introduce my sewing machine to you, because a lot of people have asked what sewing machine is it that you use. It's a Pfaff sewing machine, which I swear by actually. It's a Quilt Ambition 2.0. And the very important thing when you're buying a sewing machine is that you have got this extra arm at the back, which you can engage like this just by clipping it down, and then that will help the transport and it'll just grip everything so much better from the top. I like this because it's got like all sorts of lovely stitches, and very nice also the buttonholes which you can get around it, and you can get like a shirt buttonhole and a coat buttonhole and a corded buttonhole and all those things that we're going to look at later. So with your sewing machine already and threaded up, we're going to have a look now at the different techniques that you're going to learn in order to sew a nice garment, a nice cushion, something really great. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to introduce you to the plain seam here, and then we've also got a French seam which goes wrong a lot of the time. I have seen some hideously wide French seams, so you don't want to do that, so we're going to do it very slim. We're going to top stitch our seams as well, and then I'm going to show you how to understitch and what that means and what it does. And then we're going to do an exercise to practice our precision on the sewing machine. Sewing machine thread up. Let's get going. So get yourself some sample fabric ready, maybe some cotton or some calico. That's all fine, and then we can get started making our first seam samples. We're first going to construct a plain seam, and for that you're going to place two fabrics on top of each other, and then we're going to sew from one end to the other. Place your fabric underneath the presser foot and line it up with the 1.0 or the 1.5. Most commercial patterns have a seam allowance of 1.5. and mine have 1. That's 3/8 of an inch, and it's the first line on your sewing machine. You don't want to start directly on the end. You want to start a tiny little bit in, and then one stitch forward and a couple of stitches back, and then go forward again. What you don't want to do is do lots of lock-in stitches. Hang on. A little lower down on your sewing machine you also got numbers. That's the 1 centimeter here, so you can line up with that as well. So keep your eye on those lines. Do not look at your needle, just at those lines. Keep lining it up and feeding your fabric in perfectly straight. Sounds simple, but actually not that simple. Then get to the very end of your fabric and then lock the stitches in, just a couple of stitches. Now we've got the seam done, we need to iron it. Now most people start ironing it apart like this straight away. You don't want to do that because you might get a puckered seam. First you want to press it out. On this fabric it probably wouldn't matter, but in a lot of cases it actually does. So first you press the seam flat. So when people talk about pressing seams flat, this is what they mean. And then you take the seam allowances and you force them apart and you run over it with your iron. That way you get a beautiful seam. You always want to iron from the outside as well. Sometimes though you have a little mark on the outside where the seam allowance is pressing through, especially if it's very thick. On your iron you've got a groove actually in here, and that can take a little bit of fabric, so you can just glide with your iron underneath that like this and iron the little mark that was left out. Now I don't have to do that on this fabric, but that gives me a beautiful plain seam. Now we're going to have a look at top stitching. So just imagine this is an edge anywhere, neckline, trouser leg, whatever, skirt, and you want to give it some top stitching. When you iron it, carefully roll your fabric so that the lining is facing you and you've got that millimeter standing over so it won't roll out. So that will be the lining side and this is the proper side. So you can see it won't roll. Give it a good press from both sides. And now on your sewing machine, mine is on 2.5, you can go to 3 or 3.5. I generally use the 3.5 because I think it's really nice to have a very long stitch. It looks much more professional. So I'm starting on the 3.0 here and I line up my edge with whatever's on my presser foot. For me in this case, it's that little red mark. That's typical for pfaff, but you might have another foot. So use a foot though that has a plastic bit in the middle so that you can actually see where you need to line it up to. Secure your stitches and take it out. And that gives you a beautiful top stitched edge. On the left it's 3.0 and here it's 3.5, and 3.5 I think looks much nicer. Any top stitching you need a really long stitch. That's the rule, that's all. You can do another line next to it and you can line up your presser foot with that, and that gives you that typical sort of jeans denim look. And it's quite easy to do that, really. Just keep looking at the edge there, lining it up with the edge. Don't look anywhere else, not the needle. That's such an important thing to learn. And now we've got an absolutely great little top stitched hem, neckline, whatever. Now we're going to do some understitching. So you've just done your seam and it's beautiful and it's on a neckline and you don't want it to roll out. So roll over your lining, over your seam allowance, and we're going to top stitch down the side like you can see here. So the seam allowance is underneath that. And then when I roll that, I get the most beautiful edge. Nothing will roll out. That's what you need to do around necklines and armholes. Roll what is
so place it
the
underneath
lining
the sewing
fabric
machine
over the seam allowance, and we're now going to line up with a little red dot on the left hand side of the presser foot, and then we're going to gently pull the fabric apart so that we're not getting any pleats in there. That I've seen that, and then the understitching doesn't actually work. So just gently pull it. Don't over pull it like this because that will distort your stitching line and it won't look very nice. So all the way to the end, lock the stitches in, and hey presto, so now you know what understitching means. Nice one. Now we're going to do a French seam, and you want to only sew half your presser foot width. Okay, so just half, so that we get a really nice French seam and we can still keep to our seam allowance of 1 centimeter. If you're working with 1.5 using a simplicity or batrick pattern, then you can go to the edge of the presser foot and then cut back, and that will get you there as well. But for a 1 centimeter seam allowance, you need to do half a presser foot. Then you cut back like this to about 3 millimeters, and we're going to do another 5 mil, which is another half a presser foot width to do that. So now you want to grab your fabric at the top. You could iron it, but I tend not to do it. I think it's simpler and comes out better if you don't. You grab the top, and then on the sewing machine what you will do, your right hand will actually really pull this taut, and the left hand will sort out the seam there so that we get it right onto the edge. So secure at the top, and then you can see me here, I'm keeping it really taut. Grab that part at the end, nice and taut, and then wiggle out the seam so that it's nice and flat. And you can see that is possible. That is so much easier than on the ironing board. Trust me, once you get the hang of this, this is the way to do the French seam. And we're doing half a presser foot width. and we're thereby encasing now the rough edge, and we've got a totally clean seam, which is great if you're making something and you don't have an overlocker. And from the outside, absolutely perfect. You shouldn't see anything coming out. And finally, we're going to do a little exercise now to practice precision. And my kids in school really used to love this. So I've layered up 2 pieces of fabric here, and I'm just going around the edge, and I try to line up presser foot width. And so when I get to the end, I have to make sure my needle is down exactly presser foot width distance from the edge. And I go to the next edge, needle down, very important, turn, whoops, a little bit more, and across, and we're going down again to the other side, and this time we're stopping, so we've just got the presser foot width. So you need to work out where that is on your machine. And now I'm just coming in. This is so good because you're learning to control your needle, and also you're getting something that you possibly could use to decorate something. My kids in school, they always really loved doing this, and I used it for like a little cushion and stuff. So I've come in quite a bit now, and we want to look very closely at how do I know where to go. So you need to find that spot on your presser foot, and you don't look at the needle again, you're just looking at the side here, you're lining up your stitching. And for me, it's actually when the line just disappears, that's when I need to turn. The problem is on an electronic sewing machine that you can't vary the stitch with this little wheel on the side, on the right hand side, which you can do with a mechanical machine. So when you do precision sewing, then I would actually recommend that you buy a machine with IDT, but do buy one that is mechanical first if it's your first sewing machine, because you can always wiggle that, and that makes it so much easier. So that's it for this week, folks. Lesson 1 over with. Lesson 2 awaits next week at 2 p.m. back on this channel. And we are going to sew a really beautiful nautical cushion with it. Not the one that I've already got on the website. No, this is like something super simple, and you're going to really love it. So I'll see you there with a few more techniques how we can get that right. Bye.